Hello, fellow Spellweavers. It's the Fuzzician here. This is gonna be a long one. I've got a lot of things to get off my chest. Basically, treat this as a long list of things I would do if I was a developer. And this is gonna go far beyond just, hey, this card is weak, this card is strong. I'm talking about changing entire mechanics. So I'm gonna use the cards here as sort of a guide. I've also made a few custom cards to help illustrate some of the ideas I have. There's going to be quite a few sections to this, so let's kick it off with the first thing on my shit list. One turn heal. So, one turn heal specifically is annoying because of how interactive it is. And the recent attempts to make it less annoying by preventing the recycling of Eleanor is a band-aid solution to a much larger problem. And I think the problem is very simple. The 40 life win condition cannot exist. You cannot be allowed to instantly win just because you reached a certain life point. To say that, well, just nerf Word of Grace. Look, if a spell that reads, gain some life and draw a card, is the foundation for one of the most degenerate decks out there, there's a serious problem here. And the problem is with the 40 life. So what would I recommend? Well, glad you asked. First, reduce the max life to 30 instead of 40. I was originally gonna have it just be at the 20, which is where you start. But then I realized that cards like the Sun-Blessed Priest, which have life bound, would kind of lose their effect if you're at max life and you attack with it, you get nothing. And it would remove some interesting design space. So get it to 30. And second, reaching 30 doesn't do anything. You don't get anything. If you gain life when you're at 30, you just stay at 30. So how can we use this to come up with some new interesting cards? Well, I created an example of what I think would be a good way to use the mechanic of life in a deck where you do interact with the most interesting part of Spellweaver, which is, of course, the board itself. So check out this little beauty. Don't mind the art. I was using the custom card maker, and the art doesn't work properly. It's either not loading or it's just not saving. So you know what? Screw it. We're just going to stick with this. So imagine a card like this. Same requirements and cost as Antriel. I threw in Dominion. It could, of course, just be any requirements. With this effect, when it enters the field, if you have 25 or more life, you get a copy of this. If you have 30 life, you get another copy. So for 2 extra copies. So if you play this at 30 life, you get 3 flying 5/5s. Pretty scary, right? So this is essentially what I'm trying to get across. Imagine cards that benefit from having above a certain threshold of life. And I use 25 as 30 because I think they're pretty decent starting points. 25 being like the halfway point to 30 and 30 being your max. Of course, with a 30 life effect should be much more powerful. So this is just one example of what I think would be a way to change a deck that relies on healing into one that interacts with a board, and you can then print more spells, for instance, that heal. Because right now, if you printed any other way to heal, especially if Order could use it, well, it's just more fuel for a one-turn heal. And I don't think a deck should be able to win by running nothing but spells and stalling you forever, and then just magically winning the game because they just have too much life. That's ridiculous. So yeah, this is my solution. Of course, you could have a lot more cards than this. There could be another aspect. Order certainly seems like the aspect that would interact with this, but Dominion also is about gaining life. Corruption has a bit of gaining life. So yeah, I mean, though Britches could just be any combination of things. If you want to make it really interesting, make it cost like 3 different aspects: Order, Corruption, and Dominion. Though I think that's a little bit too, already a bit too awkward, considering you actually have to go above a certain amount of life, and your opponent could stop you from doing this by attacking you, or even just sending a fireball to your face. You're at 30 life, you think, oh, I'm gonna get this big play. Nope, end of turn fireball. So yeah, I think this is the way to go. So having moved on from that, let's move on to the next thing on my shit list. mill. So I'm going to use this to represent the milling in general. Now, I don't actually have a problem with the actual mechanic of milling, that is to say, sending cards from the deck to the graveyard. What I do have a problem with, however, is that upon exhausting your deck, you lose the game instantly. That's not okay. You know, I'm gonna bring this to Hearthstone a little bit, because for all the shit that I give that game, and trust me, it is a lot, they got one thing dead right. You don't lose the game when you run out of cards. You just take some fatigue damage. And I think that's how the game should be. It's just like with the 40 life win condition. You just suddenly lose. And now with the changes to the Innkeeper and Exorcism, the only card that can unmill yourself is Vulture. Good luck with that. It's a way to interact with another player that they can't do anything about. So what I would recommend is introduce fatigue damage. Now, it might have to be a bit more steep, because in Spellweaver it's possible to actually stop yourself from drawing if you run out of shrines, and if you use your Valley. If you DO every turn, your deck size doesn't increase. As long as you had at least 2 cards in your deck, you draw one and you have 1 left, just send the card back, and you never mill. So for your opponent to actually do this to you, they have to then play 1 more mill card for you to actually hit 0 and start properly taking fatigue damage. So anyways, I've designed a card for this as well, which I think could interact with it but in a more interesting way. We already have a card like that, by the way. The Deathbound Incarnate is exactly what I want to see more of. A creature that gets stronger as you mill cards. So here is another example. King Slyhull is not a very inspired design, but the idea is that you can shuffle cards from either graveyard to get an effect. So here for 5 cards you put a Might emblem on something. For 10 cards you can put 2 weakness emblems on something. I mean, there's any number of things you could do. Again, the level requirements, I just went with Corruption and Wisdom, because that's where milling is, generally speaking. But it could be anything, and that way, again, you're contesting the board in a way that uses a different part of the game, in this case, the graveyard. So you still want to mill your opponent, because that creates fuel for your synergy. So imagine taking a card like, okay, we're going to put this guy away. Imagine taking a card like Reign of the Underworld, which is currently, oh my god, this design. Imagine just reworking the whole card and having it work like at the start of your turn, you can exile some number of cards from the graveyard, or specifically creatures, and depending on how many you did, you get to summon something. If you just exile 1 thing, summon a Zombie Legion. If you exile 2 things, get a Rotting Remains. If you exile 5 things, get an Undead Hydra. You get the idea. You have this ongoing value engine. Now, I say exile because I do think the game does need to have some way to exile, so that you can't just shuffle things back into the deck, because then the game just never ends. There's gotta be a way to get rid of something where it can't come back, right? So, and I think Reign of the Underworld, I probably should have had a custom card for this. This is a perfect candidate because it's the big spell, 4 aspects, that's not being played at all because it's just super dumb. I mean, this actually slows the game down. It's a really good thing that nobody runs it, because it's just painful. If you've ever played against this card, it's so painful. Really, really dreadful. So, yeah, I think doing that, of course, I know it doesn't mesh entirely with the art, because here it looks like this thing is being followed by spirits. So, if you're excavating zombies, you know, it doesn't quite work out, but maybe instead of summoning undead creatures, you're summoning some kind of a spirit. And if you exile 7 creatures, for instance, you summon some giant dragon spirit with great stats. I don't know. But you get the idea. It's like a Tombs, but a little bit more exciting. So that takes care of the other, alternate win condition. There are 2 more cards I want to touch real quick. Grand Reunion. I would just cut this bottom win condition. It's pretty much irrelevant. If it happens, it's because the other player forgot about it, which has happened to me because nobody ever pays attention. Oh, they actually had all 4 of these things. Wow. And I think for Grand Reunion, the effect should happen at the start of your turn, and also when you play it. Because when you do it at the end of turn, you get a creature and you can't do anything with it. Like, you might have to be forced to go to the front row, and then it might just get killed for free. Whereas if you do it at the beginning of your turn, you might put it in the back if it has some kind of an effect. Like Thunderstorm Titan, you could use it immediately. So, yeah, in that case, make the mana cost 4. Because, yeah, it seems fair to me. If you're getting a creature immediately, it can do something with it. Yeah, that's pretty good. And, of course, Triangelica is the other one. Again, instantly winning the game is really, really dumb. And getting 3 Angels is not necessarily that easy. Although with the new nerf to Cataclysm, maybe it's easier than before. I would just like to see this not win the game. Just make this cost 3 mana, 3 aspects. And instead of win the game, just, I don't know, for the rest of the game, all your creatures have +1 attack and +1 speed or something like that. Or summon some Archangel-like creature when this happens. So you get a benefit that gives you value, but you're not winning the game. Your opponent doesn't just go, oh, well, he's got 3 Angels, I guess he just wins. Admittedly, this isn't being played that much, but it doesn't matter to me. My agenda here isn't to achieve a balanced metagame. I don't care that much about balance, to be perfectly honest. I want mechanics that do nothing but cause salt to go away, because I don't think they're very helpful. So with those 2 out of the way, let's move on to the next section of the video. So, Rage Rush. Now, Rage Rush has taken some hits. Take a look at the poster boy, Mr. Flame Serpent. 5 mana! I still can't believe it. 5 mana for what, a 5/1? Yeah, I know you're dealing 5 damage, but I mean, deal 5 damage to the face for 5 mana? It's not very good. And it can be blocked, and, you know, something like Flash Freeze can kill it. You know, admittedly, not a lot of things can kill it, but a few can. And 5 mana is just so much. And realistically, Molten Passageway can still cheat it out for 2 mana. So, yeah. And Ramgak is a 5 mana alternative. So why am I bringing up Rage Rush? So, the problem I have with Rage Rush is not the burn, even though that is part of the problem. It's the cheap 1-drops that are very difficult to convincingly answer. We don't the only really 1 mana card that can kill a 1-drop like that is Noxious Fumes. Yes, technically, you can also use the Flash Freeze, but Flash Freeze only deals 1 damage, and so it can't kill the Lizard. But if we had more cards like Noxious Fumes, it wouldn't be as bad. What I want Rage Rush to become is an aggressive / mid-range deck that runs cards like Ramgak, maybe even Phoenix, and it has a little bit of fuel, so it starts out by putting on pressure, but it then keeps going to try to put on pressure and maybe assemble some kind of a big burst combo with either several Flame Serpents or a bunch of Fireballs or something. But as long as the opposing side has time to react, it should be completely fair. So to this effect, I've designed a card which I think would fill a very nice niche, and it's based sort of on Fate's Touch, just a slightly smaller version. So we've got the Wild Blade. So the way I would like to see this, it's a 1 mana generic instant, and then you choose one of the 3, just like Fate's Touch. Either deal 2 damage to a creature, which would be very helpful for dealing small early game cards, or give a creature Lifebound this turn. If you have a big guy in play, you can use it to get a nice boost of life, or just redraw. I mean, yeah, it's already ancient, so that last effect probably doesn't matter too much. Yeah, probably could be replaced with something else. That's my bad. But the idea is it's a very small effect. It could fit in any deck, just like Fate's Touch, but it's a very small effect that you just might not want to pay a card. But the point is, it acts either as very small removal, or if you can give a big creature that you have Lifebound, that suddenly really pressures Rage Rush to actually deal with your board, because you can just heal, right? And if you can heal constantly, they just can't win. So I think a card like this would be a very nice way to fill that gap. Ideally, I'd like to see this just spread out across some of the aspects, because we can't just keep making ancient cards. In fact, the very last section of my video is a rant against ancient cards, but I wanted to bring this up just as an example of what we could have, even though I think this should not be ancient. I don't think anything should be ancient, because it's a bit too consistent, and if too many ancient cards in the game, there's gonna come a time where you can just make a deck full of ancient cards that doesn't run shrines at all, because why would you? So anyways, enough about that. So less aggression, more swinging into mid-range, so the games are a little longer, and both sides have more to do. The defending side has more opportunities to heal and control the board. The aggressive side gets a little bit more fuel to work with and a bit more mid-range pressure cards they can use to finish the game if their opponent is being too greedy, trying to make too big of a control deck. Moving right along is, I'm going to have a section dedicated to one card, and that is going to be good old ReAnimate. So I'm glad ReAnimate was nerfed, because fundamentally the card restricts design space in Spellweaver, since you can never print a big card that's more powerful than Bezarok. And mind you, Bezarok is not even that powerful for 5 mana, but it doesn't matter because you just reanimate it. Now, thankfully, there are ways around it. So for instance, if the developers want to print, say, a complicated triple aspect creature, and I mean 3 different aspects, like Order, Nature, Rage, for instance, all they have to do to make it not busted with ReAnimate or Molten Passageway is simply add a play boost. And play boost is really nice because it makes cards modular. You can play the smaller version, or you can play a larger version for the big effect. And ReAnimate cannot do play boosts, which means you'd only be reanimating like a weaker version, and you're paying 4 mana, so it wouldn't be that big of a deal. So this is a problem we can address. It simply means any future big cards have to have play boost, so that you can't just skip the mana cost. And while we're on the topic of ReAnimate, I have a bit of a rant against Molten Passageway as well, and I guess Burning Rage too, and I guess Dark Portal, because they all kind of represent the same thing, where you're cheating out mana. Dark Portal in particular, even though it's one of my favorite cards, I just don't like the way it works, because it warps the game to such a degree where you, as the demon player, now basically control what happens. Since after you play it, you're not only tutoring cards every turn, they're now all 1 mana cheaper, so you're likely just going to crush your opponent. But if you don't, well, then you just die. So you now become completely in control of the game, and your opponent's just hoping, well, let's hope I just drew enough removal. So while I like the idea of this kind of demon synergy, I wish it wasn't so binary, where if you don't start with it on turn 2, you're just playing like a shit version of Mono C. And if you do get it, and if your opponent doesn't have enough aggression, they just get totally steamrolled. Bummer. And as for Burning Rage, again, too much unnecessary randomness, cheating out mana, and Molten Passageway same way. If you can cheat out a Ramgak or something like that, or even a Bezarok, though now that it's double rage, it's a bit harder. I'm just generally opposed to these big swingy mana cheating cards that can either suck and do nothing and lose you the game, or instantly win you the game by putting out something really, really big. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. Ramp. So I'm going to use a good old Amethyst Scarab as the poster boy for that one. I don't think there should be ramp in Spellweaver. Oh, watch out. The trigger alert is real. I'm serious. Given the low cost of mana in general, I mean, the most expensive card we have is Cataclysm at 6, and the new Cataclysm arguably should cost 5, given how significantly weaker it is. Leaving 1 creature in play versus 0, yeah, that's quite a bit worse. I'm going to cover that separately, but other than Cataclysm, the highest cost is 5, and if you look at all the 5 cost cards, what do you got? Flame Serpent, LOL, Bezarok, which is mostly reanimated anyways. Or if you're playing it, you have plenty of mana anyways. And what? Undead Hydra? Don't make me laugh. There's no really playable 5 mana cards. So it's really just 4 mana. So the fact that you can ramp means that you start being able to play several incredibly powerful cards in a row. And that's not even talking about level ramp, which is, I think, an even worse offender, because ramping up levels gives you access to significantly more powerful cards, and it should be an investment. By going up level, you're giving up a card, and you're not extending your mana, which is a fair price for now having access to significantly more powerful cards. Now, with Mana Ramp, I'm glad at least Scarab got nerfed. You can still ramp with it, but it's quite a bit harder, because well, you have to control a Scarab. So if you play a Scarab on 2 and it gets killed, well, then you didn't ramp. And yeah, you can play 2 Scarabs, but then you only ramped once for 2 Scarabs, and you just put 2 garbage creatures into play. So, yeah, I'm glad. And I do like the idea of a creature that benefits from you going up mana. I think that's cool. But I don't like that it also itself ramps you. I don't think we should have any ramp, except maybe temporary ramp. So, for instance, Angel Blessed Knight is a temporary ramp card. Yes, it ramps, but if you just remove it, well, then the ramp is gone. So that seems a lot more fair to me, where if it's ramp that can be interacted with, that seems more balanced, whereas ramp that's permanent like this, yeah. I know that cards like Powerlust Incarnate would be basically useless without ramp, but in that case you could just buff the Incarnate a little bit. Let's say same effect, but gets +1/+1 at base. So let's say if you have 5 mana, it's now a 4/4 instead of a 3/3, right? That way it's still a decent beat stick. If you can actually get the 7 mana, it's a 5/5 for 2 mana with 3 or 4 speed. Pretty good. Other little tidbits include discard. I know I'm probably going to catch some heat for this. I hate discard. Absolutely hate it. I hate it even more when it's targeted, when they look at your hand and take something out. This, to me, basically destroys what makes these games the most fun, which is that you have things in your hand that your opponent doesn't know about and has to play around. But if they can just discard your hand, that doesn't matter. Now, small amounts of discard are not so bad. Like Mesmerizing Spirit, as much as it annoys me, is kind of tolerable. But when you combine it with Splitting Headache, and your whole hand gets discarded, that's just so demoralizing. And let's not even talk about Mind Extortion, where they just pick something they don't like. Yeah, and not only did I get to see your hand, I just got to pick something out of it that's your most powerful card. No. I mean, I would never even allow discard in a card game like this. But again, this is just me. Some people consider it, you know, an important part of the game, but I don't know. Again, I have a different set of priorities that some other people do. And now I was going to talk about Cataclysm. So I understand the need for the nerf. I believe the developers even said that they don't want removal to be able to just get rid of everything, right? And so, not only did some cards like Firebolt get a mana increase, Cataclysm now doesn't clear the board. And, okay, I understand that, but I think there is another way to go around it. A way to create a sort of a counterbalance to a card like Cataclysm. Imagine if Cataclysm is a card that clears the board, what if there was a card that refilled the board a little bit? We already have something like that with the Pony Brigade, but that's like 7 mana to get, you know, a bunch of 1/1s, which you can just get cleared by a single AoE. But imagine for a second that we had a card like this. Vanguard of the Forest. 5 mana nature spell, summons an Elf Warrior, that's a 2/2 with 3 speed, an Ancient Treant, that's a 3/4 with 1 speed and the ability, and a Moonlight Patrol, which is a flyer with 2/2 that can become a 3/3. So you're getting 6 mana worth of cards, and you could argue Ancient Treant is quite a bargain at 2 mana for just 5 mana, and more importantly, you're getting 3 of them at the same time. So if your board has just been cleared, bam, play this card, and now, again, you have several threats. So I think a 1 or 2 cards like this would be really nice for these mid-range decks as well, to be able to still get some pressure on the board following a board clear, whereas trying to repopulate it 1 creature at a time was really annoying, because if you put too much on the board, you just get Cataclysm. If you just play one thing, well, they've got something like Helm, for instance, right? Which now not only takes the creature, but it now fights against you. Or even just something like Karthus. Or the Assassin Hero Power, which just picks off a single creature. It doesn't matter how big it is, because it's a deadly attack. It would have to have a shield. So this is the last of my custom cards, and I really wish we had something like this. Nature seems like the most reasonable, but I could certainly imagine Rage summoning, like, a couple of goblins or something. Like, imagine, I mean, Ramgak would be a nice one. Like, summon the Ramgak and, like, Firebrand Goblin and some other new goblin. Maybe Gibbo and Roni's best friend, 4/4. Although that's a lot of board presence, so that would have to cost, like, 7 mana, probably. Rage of the North or something like that. Yeah, because, yeah, Ramgak plus a 4/4, which will... No, that's not a goblin, so I don't know, something else, but you get the idea. Anyways, after all that rant, I do have one other section that I want to cover, and I mentioned this before, and it has to do with the ancient mechanic. So, while I like the mechanic, and I guess we'll toss in Divine Offering as well, I don't think Ancient should exist, and I don't think any card should be Ancient. Now, hear me out. What do I mean? Now, as far as colorless cards go, I understand their place because you can just toss them into anything, but this further underlines the need to fill in the gaps with a bit more cards. So, the card I showed, Wild Blade, well, you could just have, you know, 2 versions of it, like a corruption-flavored one and, let's say, a nature-flavored one, and then you have more ways to get access to it. The idea in Spellweaver is supposed to be there's no one aspect that can do everything, but if you then mix in another aspect, you can then combine them to be able to cover most things. You know, Cleanse is a nice answer to spells and artifacts. It's an expensive answer, but it works. But imagine if it was, well, let's see, it shouldn't probably be Order because we already have Ray. What's an aspect that doesn't have it? Rage, perhaps? Maybe Dominion? But anyways, as far as the Ancient mechanic itself, which is a card that can be used for a mana and shrine, mana and card, I think every card should be able to do this. Yes, and I mean every single card. If you take a card like Noxious Fumes, you should be able to play this for a mana and a card or a corruption level. Why? Well, wait a minute, Fuzz. Doesn't that mean that we just have an automatic mana system? Yeah, but we already do. I mean, think about it. What does Divine Offering actually do? It takes a card in your hand and replaces it with a shrine, which is exactly what I'm suggesting. Instead of replacing Noxious Fumes with a corruption shrine, Noxious Fumes becomes a corruption shrine. And that way, you never have mana, a land screw, or, not enough mana, instead of almost never. And you still have to put in a little bit of work if you want to mix colors, because obviously if you want to run dual colors, you have to if you want to say corruption and rage, you have to use 1 rage and 1 corruption cards. For reference, I actually tried playing Magic the Gathering this way with some friends. Honestly, I didn't see any downside, and it was actually really fun. Now, the only concerns with this might be, one, what about Reanimate, right? I mean, if you can take a Bezarok and then just discard it into your graveyard, that's too easy, right? Well, this is where the idea of exiling cards comes into play. You either remove the card from play, that is to say, it doesn't go in your graveyard, or you literally transform it into a shrine, and it stays a shrine in your graveyard. So yes, you can't just reanimate. In fact, we had this problem with the Devourer of Worlds, where originally it was an ancient card, so you could just play it for the ancient bonus, and then reanimate a 6/6 immediately. So yeah, that would have to be taken care of for sure, because otherwise reanimate becomes a bit of a problem. And now what about skill shrines? Because Divine Offering does actually let you tutor them effectively, since not only you're drawing a 1 card per turn, but you're also looking through 5 other cards. You're essentially cycling through 6 or even 7 cards every turn, allowing you to find your skill shrines much more quickly. I mean, skill shrines would still be in the game. They would have this, in fact, exactly the same effect. You use it for a level or for a mana and then activate the hero power. So I don't see the problem there. In fact, you could still run regular shrines if specifically there was an effect. Imagine like a 2-mana creature that draws you a shrine from your deck. You would still have reason to put shrines into your deck, even if you don't need to. So yeah, that's what I'd like to see. I know this is probably never gonna happen, and I'm probably gonna catch a lot of shit for, breaking the game or whatever, trying to make it too simple. But I gotta tell you, I absolutely defy the argument that says, well, the number of shrines you put into your deck is an important part of decision making. It's not. Okay, the correct number of shrines to put into your deck is whatever number allows you to play exactly 1 shrine per turn and have every other card in your deck, every other card in your hand not be a shrine. That's it. That's the answer. And whether that's 17, 18, or whatever, doesn't matter. The only reason we put shrines into our deck is to get mana and levels. That's it. It's just a middleman. I'm just saying cut the middleman. And I know that Ancient Valley is a very nice help here because it almost eliminates the O-Screw. But again, it's a band-aid. Why not just eliminate the problem? You don't even need Divine Offering with what I'm suggesting since you never run out of mana that way. So there's no missed DOs. You don't have to worry about that. And you still, if you want to run a multi-level deck, you can still run the other shrines that are the the ones that can swap levels and can you also have some other ability. Yeah, you can still put those into your deck. They're cool because they're shrines, but they do something. So you've got skill shrines, which give you hero powers, and you've got, I don't know what you want to call them, the dual shrines, which have some other effect. You know, switching colors is actually very nice, and they have another effect which you're going to use instead. So yeah, shrines would still be in the game, just not the basic shrines. Consider this a big rant against the basic shrines, which I don't think need to exist. And when you consider between Divine Offering giving you a consistent supply of shrines and cycling your deck, and Valley basically making so you can almost never fail, we already have an automatic mana system. Every turn, almost every turn, in every game, you're going to gain a mana or a level. And this is a consequence of the fact that going up with a shrine for mana, you draw a card, which means there's no downside to doing this. Magic the Gathering actually is a little bit better about this because you don't draw a card. So Divine Offering is more necessary for Spellweaver than it will be for Magic, because in Magic, you might not want to keep gaining mana because every mana is another card you have to pay. You might just say, okay, I'm good with 6 mana, and then just keep all your cards. But in Spellweaver, because you keep drawing, there's no downside to just, you know, keep extending your mana. The more mana you have, the more options you have. So, yeah. Oh, actually, there's one more section, and it's going to be really quick. Limits. So, what do I mean by limits? Very simple. Considering how the board interacts with the game, the more creatures you add, it gets really silly. If you've ever seen a game where one side has 30 creatures, it gets really dumb because it zooms out and it becomes almost unplayable. And that's on a PC. I can't even begin to imagine what that must be like on a mobile phone, where you literally cannot click the right card because it's so small. So please limit the number of creatures either player can have per row, so this nonsense doesn't happen. Yes, it's rare, but it should not be possible. I don't know of any digital card game where there is no limit on creatures. Even the Eternal, which is a Magic clone, had a limit of creatures of, I think, 12? So, yeah, I don't know why Spellweaver doesn't do it. Yes, it only really happens if you spam tokens. But, I mean, who's to say that in the future we won't have means to spam tokens, right? So, yeah, okay, I had one more section to throw in there. I'm going to end for now. I don't think I forgot anything. There's probably a few other small cards I could mention, which are kind of like quality of life / mild annoyances. So, I guess I'll mention them anyways. Vulture, you should not have to click every single time. You shouldn't have to, if you want to activate the effect 10 times, clicking 10 times is annoying as hell. Please make it pay X mana and then just pick that many cards to bump up the Vulture. And the other one is, I don't think a renovation facility should work in the middle of combat. It's pretty annoying. It was really lame when VATS did it, where you could summon a thing in the middle of combat. Yeah, transforming one creature into another in the middle of combat several times, very annoying. Let's cut that bullshit out. Anyways, that'll be enough for this rant. Actually, wasn't as long as I thought. Only 30 minutes plus. So if you made it all the way through, and you don't want to, you know, your ears aren't bleeding from listening to me for so long, congratulations. I know that's tough to do. Just ask any of the other fellow players. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you. Well, the next Masters is actually not for a while, so I don't know. I guess then maybe I'll be inspired to make some other video, or maybe somebody else will make a stream and I'll be compelled to just take the piss out of them, which is part of my contract, actually. Whenever possible, I must take the piss out of as many Spellweaver players as possible. I didn't do it at all in this video, but, well, maybe next time. Cheers!